Now I know what you're wondering. Jake, why are you standing beside a 2009 Nissan 370Z? Well, that's where you're wrong, because this is a 2020 Nissan 370Z in the NISMO model to be specific. And why do I have this car? Well, the answer is rather simple. And the reason why I have this NISMO for the week is because after more than a decade, finally a new Z sports car is on the horizon. And so with the 370Z today, we're gonna go for a drive in Los Angeles' beautiful winding mountain roads to see, is this still a good sports car in 2020? Does this car make sense? You know, I think there are a lot of virtuous things about the 370Z that didn't get a fair shake as it's aged over the years. So let's get one last look at this sports car before we get introduced to the all-new one. For those curious, Nissan's done several basic refreshes on the curb appeal of the Z. This most latest look you're looking at is the 2015 Plus spec. The front bumper is actually really cool. I like the gray metallic and red metallic theme they have going on there. Also, for my tire nerds out there, let's take a second to appreciate how much rubber you can fit under these massively bulbous Z fenders. The front wheel spec is a 19 by 9.5 with a 245 wide tire. And the rear is a massive 19 by 10.5 with a 285 wide tire. And look how much space there is in these fenders. You know, if you're a tuner, you can run an 18 by 10.5 or an 18 by 11 square setup, no problem, which is crazy for factory bodywork. I think that's part of why the Z looks so aggressive, because when you look at it, it's all width. It's all fender. The exterior styling, I'm still a fan of. It still looks so punchy in your face. The interior, well, it's kind of a mixed bag. This Nismo model has these gorgeous Recaro sport buckets. These are the same Recaro Sportsters you'd find in like high-end European BMWs and things like that. One of my absolute favorite seats. Very comfortable, very deeply bolstered. Beyond that, the instrumentation is very basic. You have a 6-speed manual transmission, a real handbrake, thank you for that, with 3 pedals down here, which are perfectly spaced for heel and toe action. And then you have a string of analog gauges. Sorry for the glare there. This is your multimedia layout gauge. This shows like MPG, miles remaining, things like that. Fuel gauge, coolant temp right here. Big tachometer in red Nismo trim, which I like. Speedometer here, and then over here, we'll play the light, sorry about that. You have oil temperature, battery voltage, and just a time clock. I wish this showed the oil pressure, but it's a nitpick. This infotainment screen, sorry about the lighting, there we go. Wow, it is extremely dated, but I'm gonna give it a pass because we are in a sports car. Otherwise, this is very basic, very bare bones. Though in this Nismo trim, there's a lot of leather and Alcantara. The steering wheel is split with leather and Alcantara. The door cards, leather and Alcantara. The seats, likewise, leather, Alcantara. It's really simple. It does feel dated, but for a sports car, I like how focused it is as a result. Now, I know a bunch of you are really wondering, the Z is so old, can it really hang anymore? I mean, this thing came out in 2009. It's ancient. 2009 was a vastly different world than 2021 is. So, can the Z made that era really make sense today? Well, the basic bones of the Z are excellent for a sports car. It's a low slung, short, but fat, all wheelbase sports car with fat wheels and tires, and crucially, double wishbone suspension at all 4 corners, as is proper for a sports car. And then you kind of just fill in the blanks from there. Well, front engine, rear-wheel drive, low center of gravity, good suspension. What engine did we put under the hood? Well, for Nissan at the time, that was an easy choice with the VQ engine. That was their family of naturally aspirated V6 engines. In this case, it's the VQ37. Technically, you call it a VHR. It has variable valve timing, lift, 3.7 liters of displacement, 11:1 compression. At the time, in 2009, this was a seriously sporty engine. And even now, it's no slouch. In Nismo trim, this bad boy kicks out 350 horsepower. It It also produces around 270 pound-feet of torque, which may not sound like a ton, but the Z only weighs 3,250, which for a modern sports car is pretty light. I think the interesting thing about this engine, having driven a lot of 350Zs before, is how tractable the power delivery is. With the VVEL powertrain, there's so much torque on tap from like 1,500 RPM up. You do feel like you have most of it by the time you hit 2,000 RPM. For example, you can shift into 6th gear at 40 miles an hour and trundle along 1,500 revs. A-okay, all day, no problem. But if you really want to zing it, you need to take it all the way to the 7,600 RPM red line, and it just screams. Oh, that's so satisfying. Man, it's funny, people say that the Z just can't hang with modern cars, it's too slow, blah, 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 blah. When you think about the power to weight ratio, just over 3,200 pounds of 350 horsepower, it's no slouch. There is no world where the 370Z NISMO is going to feel slow. Anyone who tells you otherwise is a 12-year-old fanboy who thinks 1,000 horsepower Supras are good daily drivers. If I can nitpick, and it is my job to nitpick, sorry, Nissan Z fanboys out there, I am surprised that even with this NISMO exhaust, you know, it's a true dual setup with high flow mufflers, the actual exhaust note is very quiet. The engine itself sounds glorious. Nismo put like custom intake tubes on this thing. It's the actual engine itself makes a really pretty noise. You know, VQs kind of get hated on for kind of sounding like trumpets. Well, the 37 sounds so mellow compared to like a 350Z, for example. Engine out of the way, let's talk about the transmission. Thank God this is a 6-speed manual. That is one thing Nissan's gotten right. The new Z sports car will also have a 6-speed manual transmission. God bless Nissan for doing that. Shame on Toyota for making the Supra automatic only. They knew better, they still messed that up. I'm a manual transmission diehard. If the option is there, I will always choose a manual. And fortunately, this transmission is excellent. It really is. This is a real get in and go kind of car. It's very easy to get in this car, understand how the clutch works, where it grabs, how it bites. The gear change is nice and chunky. You can't like grip shift this thing. It takes a second. Look at that. There's a bit of feedback. There's mechanical feedback through the gates. But I like it. It feels good. If you miss a gear in the Z, it's your fault, not the car's. Also, did I mention? I definitely did mention. The pedals are perfectly spaced for heel and toe. Look at this. Easy. Though if you can't do it yourself, of course the Z has Nissan's Synchro Rev Match system. Now when this came out in 2009, it was a revelation. Basically, if you push the S button down here, it engages Synchro Rev Match. What that means is, if you're in 4th gear, you want to downshift from the 3rd, you don't know how to downshift smoothly yourself, it does it for you perfectly every time. I'm so impressed by this technology, even a decade down the road. Other cars have since implemented this, like for example in the BMW M2. But funnily enough, even in that much newer car, it's not as good. This is better. And the thing about this is, it teaches you how to do perfect downshifts yourself. So if you have Synchro Rev Match on and you do boot throttle yourself, it works together. If you have the rev match in a BMW M2 on, for example, and you flip the throttle yourself, it overshoots every time, makes the car feel so unnatural. This works with the driver. It teaches you to become a better driver, and I love that. I love the spirit behind that. I also love the fact you can easily turn it off, unlike the BMW M2. This is a driver's car. And that makes it unfortunate that some of the aspects about the Z are not up to snuff. Now, even on this Nismo model, Nissan's continued to fit a viscous fluid coupling limited slip differential. Now, sorry to bore you about this, but Nissan fanboys know that viscous diffs, they just suck. Basically, instead of using clutch plates or gears for your limited slip differential, Nissan uses this series of fluid couplings. And basically, once that fluid in the diff gets hot, the diff opens up. So, if you like to go drifting, unfortunately, the stock Z diff is not going to play. Even on the road, if you whip a U-turn too fast, you can actually feel the diff open up, which is a bit disappointing. Now, I mentioned that the Z has double wishbone suspension, and that is great. That's what you want in a sports car. It gives you a lot more grip in the corners due to the way it builds camber under compression. And on this Nismo, they've actually changed out the springs, the shocks, the sway bars. They've done a number of actual chassis rigidity stiffening measures. Like behind the front crash structure is more like welded bits, which is pretty crazy. It's a big difference to make. Now, the Nismo suspension, the biggest thing you're notice is the way it rides. The springs and shocks are just stiffer. And it feels great up here. This road is pretty bumpy like most Los Angeles Canyon roads, and it's not so stiff that it's gonna bounce you off the road like some aftermarket suspensions would do. I suspect the trade-off of that is that it probably is a little too soft for hardcore track day junkies, but it is a nice middle ground. It feels really sporty. There's still a good amount of roll in it. You can feel what the tires are doing. The Z is an honest sports car in a land and a landscape where today there just aren't many of those left. If I'm being entirely truthful, despite driving a lot of amazing cars these days, the only other cars that really count as back to basics honest sports cars are the Mazda Miata and the Toyota 86/Subaru BRZ. And as much as I love those cars, and I do love those cars, it is an entirely valid criticism if you get out of those cars and think, well, I want something a little bit more powerful. Because at first I thought to myself, well, why not just buy a V6 Camaro 1LE? Because that would definitely be faster than this around a racetrack. But then I remembered that when push comes to shove, a Camaro without a V8 is kind of a mistake. Alright, so there have been some pros and some cons for the Z, and I think I'm being pretty fair about this one. Now, the other real big con to this Nismo trim is the price. A 370Z Nismo costs $47 grand. Now, granted, Nissan has dropped the price, I believe, twice at this point now, because I believe I drove one of these cars a few years ago and it was over $50,000, which is absolutely ridiculous. But still, that's just too much money for this car. As much as I enjoy this experience, I think the reason why Nissan charges so much for a Nismo over a standard Z is all these small changes they make to this car over the standard car. You know, the different body kit, the different wheels, the aero, the change to the engine, the difference in the interior. There are a lot of great individual parts that Nissan adds into this Nismo, but it's one of those things where it isn't more than just the sum of all of its parts. I think for most enthusiasts, you're gonna get 90% of this experience from a base 370Z that costs 30 grand. And that does make the Nismo a tough sell. And while I'm caught behind the slowest traffic in the world going 30 miles an hour under the speed limit, let's talk about the 400Z, the all-new Z sports car that's finally coming for 2022. The new Z is actually technically based on this same architecture, which is actually the architecture that underpinned the 350Z as well. So it's old basic bones, but again, these basic bones are good bones. That means low roof line, low hood line, low center of gravity, double wishbone suspension, front engine, rear wheel drive, and crucially, the new Z car will have a manual transmission just like this 370Z does. And so I'm already willing to give it a lot of slack, a lot of leeway as a sports car, just because it does tick those fundamental boxes right. And having driven recent product like the Infiniti Q50 Red Sport 400, or Q60 Red Sport 400, excuse me, that engine, which is the engine that will be in the 400Z, is lovely. It doesn't necessarily feel turbocharged until you realize how fast you're going. It makes a nice noise. It does have that sort of Nissan warble that you get with this engine too. And it's funny, I drove a Q60 with the optional sports exhaust on it from Nissan or Infiniti, and it was rowdier than this thing. It sounded louder and crazier, which, you know, gives me hope, because, you know, it doesn't lose that sensation that some turbocharged engines do get of sounding good and feeling visceral. So I have high hopes for the new Z car, because if you take all the good things about the 370Z and put them in a newer, more thought out platform, that can only be a good thing. If you've got more to say, I want to hear in the comments down below. I do have more to say, so I'm going to talk about it in a full 370Z retrospective video coming out on this channel very soon. If you want to see more about the 370Z, the way it drives these beautiful mountain roads, and it does drive quite nicely, check out the POV with 3D audio drive video I have coming up as well. In any case, my name is Jake Stump. You've been watching Drive, Brake, Fix, Repeat. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time where I go do more fun things with cars. Bye!